Hi, Jim Ostrowski here, back with the Liberty Moving podcast. It's been a few days. Today I'm going to talk about progressivism and leftism and what these terms mean. Language is really important in politics. It's one of the themes of my work and will be one of the themes of the podcast. My favorite expression in that regard is politics is a battle of the dictionary. The government uses words to kind of mislead people into misconceiving the nature of what the government's doing. And I use the word regulation. It sounds like a beautiful thing. The government's protecting me. Oh my gosh, I love you. But when I look at regulation, I see the government mugging people who are doing nothing to damage anybody's life, liberty, or property. So I'm not going to endeavor to prove that I'm right and the other people are wrong. I'm just using that as an example. The same reality can be described with very different words. And this is all deliberate. All the words used to cover up the crimes of the state are beautiful, mellifluent words that really are designed to obscure and confuse instead of clarify and enlighten. Now, the other problem with language in politics is these labels or these ideologies. What do they mean? It's really important to understand what these basic words mean in their core definition. Because if you don't understand what they mean, then how can you be for them or against them? How can you communicate your beliefs to other people? How can you, if there's not a common understanding of what these words mean, you can't go out and be in favor of something. What are you for? I don't know. I don't have a word for it. And speaking of that, this notion that labels are bad, and I don't want to be labeled. I vote for the person. I don't vote for the label. Well, I don't even know what that means. You vote for the person without regard to their ideology, which determines their policy positions. That's not smart. Okay, don't do that. Don't do that. I'm not saying character doesn't matter. Character matters, but ideology matters too, and policy positions matter. And in some ways, they matter more, unless you think the person's just a liar. If you think the person's a liar, then you can't really vote for their ideology because they may be lying to you. I understand that. There's some complexities here, obviously. But as I said, a label is just a word standing for a concept that stands for some aspect of objective reality. If you don't believe in objective reality, just turn the podcast off right now, because nothing that I say means anything, and you're never going to know anything except the gobbledygook in your own brain. So I do believe in an objective reality. So labels are how we understand things, distinguish them from other things, communicate the similarities and differences to other people so that joint action is possible. Without labels, we're lost. In politics, you have to have a word for what you're for or what you're against. Now, I wrote the book Progressivism, a primer, because I had identified the nature of the regime that has ruled and ruined America for 100 years. But there was no general agreement on what to call it. So I settled on the word progressivism for lots of reasons that are explained in the book. But there's other meanings of progressivism. So there's still a tremendous amount of confusion. I do believe that since I've been using progressivism over a number of years, that it does seem to be gaining in popularity. I am completely against the use of the word liberal to mean progressive. And I think that that is fading in popularity, and hopefully at some point people like me can call ourselves liberals, and people will have a rough idea what we're talking about. But I'm not going to talk about the word liberal today. That'll be another podcast. So progressivism, the core meaning, as I explain in my book, is the use of government force to improve society. The use of government force to improve society above and beyond keeping the peace. That's not progressive movement didn't come along and say, you know what? We need to enforce the law against common law crimes. There wasn't anybody on the opposite side of that argument. Progressivism is not about the defensive use of force. It's about the aggressive, offensive, interventionist use of force. That's what it is. That's its core meaning. I'm not gaming it. I'm not straw manning it. That's what it is. So, we'll talk about leftism as well, and how the two words, concepts interrelate. So, the core, explain the core meaning of progressivism. The inherent elements of progressivism, as I explain in the book, make it a bad model for government. And that's why the country's falling apart. And I predicted it. People probably thought when I said a primer on the idea of destroying America, oh, he's just trying to sell books. Well, I was trying to sell books, but, I have my integrity too. I was trying to be accurate about what the book's about and what's happening in the country. And I've been vindicated, I think, in many, many ways by everything that's happening in the last year, particularly. So, the main flaws in progressivism, I'll just go through this really quick, because this is not the point of the podcast. It's really about what words mean. But progressives have no theory of costs. They have no limiting principle. And they're not able to scrutinize themselves. And these are really, and I delineated all these objections in the book. And there's no argument against it. Nobody's refuted my book. And good luck trying. I assume that progressives will ignore my book until it sells 1 million copies, which is why my goal is to sell 1 million copies. So, the reason why progressives can't scrutinize themselves is that progressivism is not a rational philosophy. Progressivism is about, it's a form of therapy, self-help therapy, to deal with a difficult world. I'm going to pass a law. There's a problem. I'm going to pass a law, and we've seen when there's mass shootings sometimes, without anybody knowing what actually happened. I've seen this happen in about an hour. All of a sudden, they're advocating gun control. There was one episode. I think the mass shooting was in California a few years ago, where it appeared that it was an act of terrorism. Now, the one thing that you're not going to stop a terrorist with is a gun control law. A terrorist is willing to die in the commission of the act. He's not going to be worried about, copping a plea to a felony gun charge and getting 6 months and five years probation. But you heard the media immediately saying, "Oh, we need more gun control." just silly nonsense. In other words, it's not rational. It's about taking some steps to make the person think that something's being done about a problem, so they can feel better and sleep better at night. So that's all in the book. There are other meanings of progressivism, which is not a particularly difficult, philosophical problem. I mean, I'm not the god of the dictionary. I don't get to dictate what words mean, except on the margins, clarifying what words mean. But the different meanings create a lot of confusion. So there's procedural progressivism, and the example I use is, hey, let's elect senators instead of having the state legislature do it. Let's bring the power closer to the people. That's like procedural progressivism. That's not what my book is about, quite frankly. My book is about once you've got all the procedures down and the government's in place, what are you doing to the citizenry? That's what my book is about. And that's in many ways what the core of the old capital P progressive era was. So there's also progressivism can mean, liberal cultural attitudes. That's not that's not how I'm using the word. Progressivism can also mean, the left wing of the Democratic Party. They're a progressive Democrat. Again, all these uses of the word progressive are fine. There's no law that says that the word can only mean one concept. The problem is they create a tremendous amount of confusion. And confusion is not good. The reason why confusion is not good is that the conceptual chaos of what the ruling ideology is allows the current system to persist by inertia, which is the strongest force in the universe. That's why I wrote the book, which anybody who cares about American politics or government should read. I've sold 11,000 copies. I'm going to sell a hell of a lot more, including now that I have a podcast. By the way, subscribe to the podcast so I can get to the magic number of 1,000 subscribers. So in my book, I explain that 90% of Americans are actually progressives in that definition, whether they admit it or not, realize it or not. 90% of Americans believe in a significant degree of progressive big government programs to improve life. If you don't believe me, do a poll on Social Security. Do a poll on the minimum wage. Do a poll on unemployment insurance. 3 dumb programs that most people in both parties support. I could explain why these programs are dumb to a bunch of 8th graders if you gave me an hour. So let's talk about leftism. We know what progressivism is in general terms. Let's talk about leftism. It's a different thing. Excuse me. Leftism and progressivism are 2 different things, but they're often conjoined in the same people, thus adding to the confusion. Confusion's bad. That's why I'm having this podcast. That's why I wrote my book. I'm going to write other books about this topic until people get it, or just don't want to get it. I can't help you if you don't want to get it. These are 2 very bad ideas, but conceptual confusion about them is like a smokescreen in war that prevents you from seeing things clearly. Leftism is a very complex conceptual and psychological mindset. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I'm battling a dry cough. I'm doing the best I can. So, like progressivism, leftism is not rational. It's emotional. It's an emotional mindset masquerading as a rational and just political philosophy. So what is leftism? In my view, and I'm writing a book on this at the moment, but it's not out yet. Leftism is a excuse me, fanatical desire to establish material equality among people. But I've got news for you. People are not equal. People are not equal. So leftism requires massive and constant government intervention to try to make them equal, which will never happen. The goal is so absurd that it is never achieved. In fact, as Orwell showed, leftism creates new forms of inequality by creating a ruling class that always remains a little bit more equal than everybody else. There's no actual argument for equality. The argument is envy, the hatred of people that one perceives as one's betters. I've observed leftism and leftists for years, studied history, and I'm led to the conclusion that the core of leftism is personal unhappiness. The leftist refusing to accept blame or responsibility for his own predicament scapegoats the successful, the rich, the talented, the attractive, and popular as the villains in his own misery. The leftist hates his betters and seeks vengeance. We're seeing it on the street on a daily basis. The illusory and fallacious pseudo-moral theory of material equality gives the angry leftist a moral gloss to his desire for revenge against those he hates. My theory explains why leftists throughout history have committed the most evil atrocities without compunction. In fact, with the apparent belief that these atrocities are somehow heroic. Leftism is an open invitation to engage in evil. Recent events, including the murder of cops and protesters by leftists, confirm the theory that I developed well before these riots started. I've been working on this leftism project for a couple of years. So I have explained what leftism and progressivism mean. For now, I'm just going to point out that, again, these ideologies are often conjoined in the same people. So you can be a left progressive, and unfortunately there's a lot of these around, as we all know. I use the term left progressive to distinguish them from supporters of big government and the Republican Party who are not leftists and who are quite comfortable with economic inequality. Progressivism and leftism are both bad ideas. They're based on dark emotions, not reason. Progressivism is based on fear, leftism on hate. Both mindsets are quite comfortable using government violence to achieve their goals. Neither cares about costs, and both mindsets seek out scapegoats to blame for their problems. I'm going to wrap it up shortly here. Leftism is resurgent in the United States, obviously, and I saw this coming, by the way, years ago, and decided to, put a book out. I haven't been able to get the book out. I will, but I saw this coming. I'm not saying this looking back at the last 6 months. I knew this was coming 2 years ago, so I've just been proven right, as I usually am, by subsequent events. Finally, because leftism is resurgent, this is a very dangerous situation. Also, leftism, as it always does, provokes a reaction, and not always a wise reaction from the right. As I pointed out elsewhere, the right and the left like to fight over who gets to use the state to impose their distorted worldview on the rest of us at gunpoint. So, I'm going to end it on this thought, and this is going to be a constant theme, obviously, in the podcast. Libertarians have a lot of work to do to combat these ideologies that are hostile to liberty. For ideas on how to do so, see my short Kindle book, How to Revive the Liberty Movement and Defeat the Progressive State of America, and pick up a copy of Progressivism, which explains what progressivism is in detail. I explain what it is. Theoretically, I use examples. The title doesn't begin to tell you what's in the book, but the bottom line is I pretty much demolished the concept, and I'm going to do the same to leftism, and I'm also working on another book on archism, which is a word you're probably not that familiar with, and I'm not going to get into it today. So it's really important to understand what leftism and progressivism are, because now they're sort of combined, and we have to deal with the fallout. So that's enough for today. Over and out for the Liberty Moving podcast from Buffalo, New York, Jim Ostrowski.